If you feel tired of being emotionally drained, if small things disturb your peace, if people's words linger in your mind long after they are spoken, then this teaching is for you. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from how we react to what happens. Two people can face the same situation, yet one remains calm while the other suffers deeply. The difference is not life itself. The difference is reaction. The less you react, the lighter your mind becomes. The lighter your mind becomes, the happier your life feels. Today, you will learn powerful Buddhist lessons that will help you master emotional control, protect your inner peace, and understand why happiness grows when reactions fade. Suffering begins the moment you react unconsciously. Buddhism teaches a very important truth that most people overlook. Pain is a natural part of life, but suffering is something the mind creates. Pain comes from outside. It can be a harsh word, a loss, a mistake, or an unexpected problem. Suffering begins only after the mind reacts to that pain. When someone speaks rudely to you, those words are nothing more than sound waves traveling through the air. They do not have the power to hurt you on their own. They become painful only when your mind holds on to them, replays them again and again, and turns them into a personal story. The mind starts asking questions like, why did they say that? Or how could they treat me this way? And with each thought, the suffering grows stronger. Most people believe that others cause their suffering, but Buddhism teaches that suffering is born from unconscious reaction. When the mind reacts automatically, emotions rise very quickly. Anger appears. The body becomes tense. The breath becomes shallow. The heart begins to race. In just a few seconds, inner peace disappears, even though nothing physical has actually harmed you. This is how suffering takes control without you even realizing it. The event passes quickly, but the reaction keeps it alive inside your mind for hours, days, or even years. The Buddha taught that awareness is the key to breaking this cycle. Awareness creates a small but powerful space between what happens and how you respond. In that space, you are no longer a prisoner of impulse. You regain the ability to choose when you pause. Even for a single breath, the emotion begins to weaken. You start to see the situation clearly instead of emotionally. You realize that you do not need to react to everything. You do not need to defend yourself every time. You do not need to carry someone else's behavior inside your heart. As awareness grows, you begin to understand a deep truth. Your peace does not come from controlling people or situations. It comes from mastering your own mind. When you stop reacting unconsciously, emotions lose their grip over you. Anger fades faster. Hurt does not stay as long. Situations that once disturbed you begin to feel smaller. This is the moment suffering starts to weaken. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become more aware. And with awareness, you reclaim your inner freedom. 2. Not everything deserves a response. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes exhausted, not because life is too heavy, but because we respond to too many things that do not deserve our energy. Every day people speak, judge, complain, compare, and express opinions. If you react to all of it, your mind never rests. Most suffering comes from the belief that everything requires a response. A message must be answered, a comment must be explained, a criticism must be defended. But the Buddha taught that wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. When someone says something negative, the mind immediately feels pressure to react. It wants to correct, justify, or prove something. But reacting does not always bring peace. Often, it only fuels more conflict and keeps the mind disturbed. Buddhism teaches that silence can be a form of deep strength. When you choose not to react, you are not accepting disrespect. You are protecting your inner peace. Not every word deserves your attention, and not every opinion deserves space in your mind. The mind becomes calmer when you understand that most things are temporary. Words disappear as soon as they are spoken. Emotions pass if they are not fed. Situations change whether you react or not. When you stop giving unnecessary responses, the mind begins to settle. You conserve your emotional energy. You stop scattering your peace across every external trigger. This is why monks and wise practitioners often speak very little. They have learned that unnecessary reactions create unnecessary suffering. Buddhism also teaches that reacting gives power away. When you react impulsively, you allow others to control your emotional state. A single comment can ruin your entire day. A small disagreement can stay in your mind for hours. But when you choose not to react, you take that power back. You decide what enters your inner world. You decide what stays and what leaves. This choice brings freedom. As you practice non-reaction, you begin to feel lighter. Life feels less noisy. Your mind feels less crowded. You stop feeling the need to explain yourself to everyone. You stop engaging in meaningless argument. You realize that peace does not come from being heard by everyone, but from being at ease within yourself. When you learn that not everything deserves a response, happiness begins to grow naturally. 3. Emotional control is inner freedom. Buddhism teaches that true freedom has nothing to do with changing the outside world. You can change your job, your city, your relationships, and even your identity, yet still feel trapped inside your own mind. The Buddha taught that the deepest prison is not made of walls, but of uncontrolled emotions. When anger decides your words, when fear decides your choices, when desire decides your direction, you are not living freely. You are being pulled by forces you do not understand. Emotional control is not restriction. It is liberation. Most people believe freedom means expressing everything they feel. If they are angry, they release it. If they are hurt, they react. If they are afraid, they avoid. But Buddhism teaches that acting on every emotion strengthens its control over you. Each reaction trains the mind to repeat the same pattern again and again. Over time, emotions no longer visit the mind. They rule it. This is why many people feel exhausted, unstable, and restless even when life seems fine. Their emotions are constantly in charge. The Buddha taught that emotions are not enemies. They are signals. But a signal is meant to be observed, not blindly obeyed. When anger arises, it is pointing to discomfort. When fear arises, it is pointing to uncertainty. When sadness arises, it is pointing to attachment. The problem is not the emotion itself. The problem begins when the mind identifies with it and says, "This emotion is me." The moment you believe you are your emotion, you lose freedom. You feel forced to act, speak, or decide from that emotional state. Through mindfulness, Buddhism teaches a different way. Instead of saying, "I am angry," you learn to say, "Anger is present." This small change creates a powerful distance. You are no longer inside the emotion. You are watching it, and the moment you observe an emotion without reacting, its intensity begins to fade. Just like a fire without fuel slowly dies, emotions without reaction lose their strength. As you practice this, you begin to notice something profound. Emotions rise on their own, and they fall on their own. You do not need to fight them, and you do not need to follow them. They come, stay briefly, and leave. When you allow this natural process, the mind becomes calm. You stop feeling pushed and pulled by every inner storm. This calmness is not dullness. It is clarity. It is the clarity that allows you to respond wisely instead of reacting impulsively. The Buddha taught that the mind trained in awareness becomes unshakable. This does not mean life stops challenging you. People will still disappoint you. Situations will still be uncertain. But the difference is, inside you, your peace is no longer fragile. It no longer depends on people behaving a certain way. It no longer depends on everything going according to plan. You become emotionally self-sufficient. With emotional control, you experience a deep sense of dignity. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop defending your worth. You stop seeking validation from reactions. You realize that silence is often stronger than argument, and calm is often stronger than anger. You feel grounded in yourself. This groundedness is freedom. Buddhism teaches that happiness is not excitement or constant pleasure. Happiness is stability. It is the quiet confidence that no matter what arises, you can meet it with awareness. Emotional control gives you this confidence. You trust yourself. You trust your ability to remain centered. You trust that emotions will pass. And when you trust this, fear weakens, anger softens, and peace becomes your natural state. This is why emotional control is inner freedom, not because emotions disappear, but because they no longer own you. You become the observer, not the prisoner. And when the mind is free, happiness follows naturally, without force, without chasing, and without struggle. 4. Most reactions are rooted in ego. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering does not come from what people do to us, but from the ego inside us that wants to be protected, praised, and validated. The ego is the part of the mind that says, "This is who I am," and feels threatened when that image is challenged. When someone criticizes you, ignores you, or disagrees with you, it is often not the situation that hurts, but the ego feeling wounded. The reaction rises quickly because the ego believes it must defend itself to survive. The ego constantly seeks approval and fears rejection. It wants to be seen as important, respected, intelligent, or worthy. When this desire is not met, emotions appear. Anger arises when the ego feels disrespected. Sadness arises when it feels unvalued. Fear arises when it feels insecure. Buddhism teaches that reacting from ego strengthens its control over the mind. Every time you react to protect your image, the ego grows stronger, and with it suffering grows deeper. The Buddha taught that the self we protect so fiercely is not fixed or permanent. It is a collection of thoughts, memories, and labels created by the mind. When you observe closely, you begin to see that the ego is not who you truly are. It is a mental construction. When someone insults you, they are not touching your true nature. They are only interacting with a story your mind believes about itself. Understanding this weakens the ego's power. As awareness deepens, you start to notice how many reactions come from the need to be right. Arguments arise not because truth is at stake, but because the ego wants to win. Defensiveness appears not because you are wronged, but because the ego feels exposed. Buddhism teaches that letting go of the need to always be right brings great peace. When you stop defending an image, you stop fighting invisible battles. Silence becomes easier. Calmness becomes natural. The Buddha did not teach the destruction of the ego through force. He taught understanding. When you see the ego clearly, you stop feeding it. You stop reacting to protect it. You stop taking everything personally. You begin to respond from wisdom instead of identity. This does not make you weak, it makes you free. You realize that your worth does not depend on being admired or understood by others. When reactions rooted in ego fade, life becomes lighter. Criticism no longer feels like an attack. Praise no longer feels like something you need. You stand steady whether others approve or not. This is inner balance. Buddhism teaches that when the ego loosens its grip, peace takes its place. And where there is peace, happiness naturally grows. 5. Calmness is a skill, not a personality trait. Many people believe that calmness is something you are either born with or not. They look at peaceful people and think they are naturally calm, or they are just lucky to have that kind of personality. Buddhism teaches something very different. Calmness is not a personality trait. Calmness is a skill, and like every skill, it is developed through practice, patience, and awareness. The Buddha taught that the mind is like a wild animal when it is untrained. It reacts quickly, jumps from thought to thought, and becomes restless at the smallest disturbance. This does not mean the mind is bad. It means it has not been trained. Just as the body becomes stronger through repeated physical training, the mind becomes calmer through repeated awareness. Every time you choose not to react immediately, you are training your mind. Every time you pause before speaking, you are strengthening inner discipline. Calmness grows slowly, quietly, and naturally through these small moments. Most people think calmness means nothing affects you anymore. Buddhism teaches that calmness means things still affect you, but they no longer control you. A calm mind still notices anger, fear, or sadness, but it does not get swept away by them. When an emotion arises, the trained mind observes it without panic. It does not judge the emotion or try to push it away. It simply watches, and when an emotion is watched without reaction, it begins to soften on its own. The Buddha compared the untrained mind to a flame flickering wildly in the wind. Every sound, every word, every situation makes it shake. But the trained mind is like a flame protected from the wind. The world can be noisy, chaotic, and unpredictable, yet the inner flame remains steady. This steadiness is not achieved overnight. It is built through consistent practice of mindfulness in everyday life. In moments of irritation, you practice patience. In moments of stress, you practice breathing. In moments of temptation, you practice restraint. Many people give up too quickly because they expect instant calmness. Buddhism teaches patience. The mind has been reacting unconsciously for many years. It cannot change in a few days. Each time you fail and react, that is not defeat. It is part of the learning process. Awareness grows even when you notice that you have reacted. The simple act of noticing is already progress. Over time, reactions become shorter. Emotions pass faster. The space between stimulus and response becomes wider. Calmness also grows when you stop feeding unnecessary thoughts. Much of the mind's agitation comes from overthinking, imagining future problems, and replaying past events. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place where calmness exists. When you bring attention back to your breath, your body, and what is happening right now, the mind settles. Calmness is not created by controlling life. It is revealed when mental noise quiets down. As this skill develops, you begin to trust yourself more. You are no longer afraid of your emotions because you know they will pass. You are no longer afraid of difficult situations because you know how to meet them calmly. This confidence brings deep peace. You stop wishing to be someone else. You stop comparing your inner state to others. You understand that calmness is your responsibility and your practice. The Buddha taught that a calm mind leads to wisdom, and wisdom leads to happiness. Calmness allows you to see situations clearly. You make better decisions. You speak with intention. You act without regret. Life does not become perfect, but it becomes manageable. Calmness becomes your foundation. This is why calmness is a skill, not a personality trait. Anyone can develop it. No matter how reactive you have been in the past, the mind can be retrained. Each moment of awareness is a step toward peace. Each pause is a victory. And slowly, without force, calmness becomes your natural state. Letting go is the path to peace. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering exists Because we hold on too tightly to things that were never meant to be held forever. We hold on to expectations, to people, to outcomes, to words that were spoken long ago, and to versions of life that no longer exist. The mind believes that holding on will keep us safe, but in reality, holding on is what creates tension, anxiety, and pain. Letting go is not loss. Letting go is relief. Most reactions are born from attachment. When you expect people to behave a certain way and they do not, disappointment arises. When you expect life to go according to plan and it changes suddenly, fear appears. When you expect respect, loyalty, or fairness and do not receive it, anger follows. Buddhism teaches that these reactions are not caused by the situation itself, but by attachment to how we think things should be. The mind suffers because it resists reality instead of understanding it. The Buddha taught that everything in life is impermanent. People change, situations change, feelings change. Even you change. When the mind clings to what is constantly changing, it experiences stress. This is like trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding that reality match your expectations. Many people misunderstand letting go. They think it means weakness, avoidance, or giving up. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Letting go requires great inner strength. It means you are willing to face reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. It means you accept that you cannot control other people's thoughts, emotions, or actions. You can only control how you relate to them within your own mind. When you let go of the need to control outcomes, your reactions soften. You stop panicking when things do not go your way. You stop forcing answers that are not yet ready to appear. You allow life to unfold naturally. This does not make you passive. It makes you flexible, and flexibility is a form of wisdom. The Buddha taught that a flexible mind suffers less because it flows with change instead of resisting it. Letting go also applies to the past. Many people continue to suffer because they replay old moments repeatedly. Regrets, mistakes, betrayals, and missed opportunities remain alive only because the mind refuses to release them. Buddhism teaches that the past no longer exists anywhere except in memory. When you react emotionally to the past, you are creating new suffering in the present. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means no longer allowing the past to disturb your inner peace. As you practice letting go, you begin to feel lighter. The mind becomes less crowded. Emotional reactions lose intensity. You stop carrying unnecessary mental weight. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. This lightness is peace, not excitement, not pleasure, but a deep sense of ease within yourself. The Buddha taught that peace is not something you chase. It appears naturally when attachment fades. When you stop clinging to outcomes, you sleep better. When you stop clinging to opinions, you argue less. When you stop clinging to expectations, you feel less disappointed. Life becomes simpler, not because life changed, but because your relationship with it changed. Letting go also teaches trust. You begin to trust that you can handle whatever arises. You no longer feel the need to control every detail. You understand that uncertainty is part of life, and that reacting with fear only increases suffering. When you let go, you meet uncertainty with calm awareness instead of panic. This is why Buddhism teaches that letting go is the path to peace. Not because life becomes perfect, but because the mind becomes free. Free from constant resistance, free from unnecessary reactions, free from the illusion of control. And when the mind is free, happiness is no longer distant. It is present, quiet, and steady within you. 7. Inner silence is the highest form of happiness. Buddhism teaches that the happiness most people chase does not come from excitement, achievement, or constant stimulation. True happiness comes from inner silence. Inner silence is not the absence of sound around you. It is the absence of emotional noise inside you. It is the state where the mind no longer reacts compulsively, no longer argues with reality, and no longer clings to every thought and feeling that appears. This silence is not emptiness. It is clarity, and within this clarity, peace naturally lives. Most people live with a loud inner world. Thoughts talk endlessly. Emotions demand attention. The mind judges, compares, remembers, worries, and plans without rest. Because of this constant inner movement, even moments of comfort feel unstable. Happiness comes briefly and leaves quickly. Buddhism teaches that as long as the mind is noisy, happiness will always feel fragile. But when reactions fade, silence begins to appear. And when silence appears, happiness stops depending external conditions. The Buddha taught that the mind becomes noisy because it is constantly reacting. Every word is analyzed. Every situation is interpreted. Every emotion is followed. Over time, this habit creates inner chaos. But when you stop reacting unnecessarily, the mind slowly settles. Thoughts become fewer, emotions become softer. Awareness becomes stronger. This is not something you force. It happens naturally when reactions are no longer fed. Inner silence begins when you stop needing to comment mentally on everything that happens. Someone behaves rudely, and you do not replay it for hours. A situation does not go your way, and you do not argue with it inside your head. A thought arises, and you do not chase it. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are like echoes. When you stop responding, they fade on their own. Silence is what remains when you stop adding more noise. Many people fear inner silence because they mistake it for emptiness or loneliness. Buddhism teaches that silence is fullness. In silence, you feel grounded. You feel present. You feel whole without needing anything extra. This is why monks spend years cultivating stillness through meditation. They are not escaping life. They are learning how to live without being enslaved by mental noise. They discover that happiness does not need constant stimulation. It needs stillness. When inner silence deepens, emotional reactions lose their power. Anger no longer hijacks the mind. Fear no longer dominates decisions. Sadness comes and goes without pulling you into despair. You feel emotions, but they do not disturb your center. This is the state the Buddha referred to as equanimity, a balanced mind that remains steady in pleasure and pain, praise and blame, gain and loss. Inner silence also changes how you relate to others. You stop reacting to provoke reactions. You stop seeking validation through arguments or explanations. You listen more. You speak less. But with more intention. People may not understand your calmness, but you no longer need them to. Your peace is no longer dependent on being understood. This independence brings deep contentment. Buddhism teaches that silence reveals wisdom. When the mind is quiet, you see situations clearly. You understand when to act and when to wait. You sense when something is worth your energy and when it is not. Many mistakes are made, not because people lack intelligence, but because their minds are too noisy to see clearly. Silence sharpens awareness. Awareness guides action. This is how peace turns into wisdom. Inner silence also brings a deep sense of safety. You stop fearing your own thoughts and emotions because you know they will pass. You stop fearing uncertainty because you trust your ability to remain centered. This trust dissolves anxiety. You are no longer constantly preparing for emotional storms. You know that even if a storm comes, you will not lose yourself in it. The Buddha taught that this state of inner silence is the foundation of true happiness. Not happiness, that rises and falls, but happiness that remains steady beneath changing circumstances. This happiness does not depend on success, relationships, or recognition. It exists because the mind is no longer fighting itself. When inner conflict ends, happiness appears naturally. As reactions fade, silence grows. As silence grows, peace deepens. As peace deepens, happiness becomes your natural state. This is why Buddhism teaches that the less you react, the happier you become. Not because life becomes easier, but because the mind becomes still. And in that stillness, you finally experience what you have been searching for all along. 8. When you stop reacting, you finally meet your true self. Buddhism teaches that most people never truly meet themselves. They live their entire lives reacting to people, reacting to emotions, reacting to memories, reacting to fear, desire, praise, blame, success, and failure. Because of this constant reaction, the mind is always occupied, always moving, always distracted. And when the mind is always reacting, there is no space to see who you truly are beneath all of it. The Buddha taught that the true self is not the voice in your head. It is not your emotions. It is not your opinions, your history, or your identity. These are all movements of the mind. When the mind is busy reacting, these movements overlap and create confusion. You begin to believe that you are your anger, your sadness, your anxiety, or your desires. But Buddhism teaches that these are temporary visitors. They arise and pass. They are not you. When you stop reacting, something very important happens. Space appears. In that space, you begin to observe rather than participate blindly. You notice thoughts arise without chasing them. You notice emotions appear without being dragged by them. This observation is awareness, and awareness is closer to your true nature than any reaction could ever be. At first, this space may feel uncomfortable. Many people feel restless when reactions stop, because they are not used to silence. The mind wants stimulation. It wants drama. It wants something to react to. Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is not a problem. It is a sign that the old habits are weakening. Just like muscles ache when they are being retrained, the mind feels uneasy when reaction patterns dissolve. As you stay with this stillness, something subtle begins to reveal itself. You begin to feel grounded without effort. You feel present without forcing attention. You feel whole without needing validation. This is the experience of simply being, not becoming, not fixing, not proving, just being. The Buddha taught that this state is always available, but it is hidden beneath layers of reaction. When reactions drop away, you no longer define yourself by what happens to you. A loss does not destroy your identity. Praise does not inflate your sense of worth. Criticism does not shake your core. You realize that these experiences move through you, but they do not define you. This realization brings immense freedom. You stop living as a collection of emotional responses and start living as awareness itself. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as we believe we must react to survive. We think that if we do not defend ourselves, we will be weak. If we do not respond, we will be ignored. If we do not react, we will lose control. But the Buddha discovered the opposite. Non-reaction does not weaken you. It stabilizes you. It brings you back to your center. It allows wisdom to guide action instead of impulse. When you meet your true self, you also stop seeking yourself in others. You stop needing constant approval. You stop chasing belonging through conformity. You stop shaping your behavior to fit expectations. This does not make you distant or cold. It makes you authentic. You interact from a place of inner fullness rather than emotional hunger. The Buddha taught that awareness is like a mirror. It reflects everything but clings to nothing. When you live from awareness instead of reaction, life continues to happen, but it no longer leaves deep scars. Experiences pass through you cleanly. They do not pile up inside your mind. This is why people who practice non-reaction often appear calm and steady. They are not suppressing life. They are allowing it to flow without resistance. Meeting your true self also brings compassion. When you are no longer controlled by reactions, you begin to see others more clearly. You realize that people act from their own pain, fear, and conditioning. Their words and actions are often unconscious reactions, just like yours once were. This understanding softens judgment. Compassion replaces resentment. You no longer need to fight others to protect yourself. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not something you gain. It is something you uncover. It is the natural clarity that appears when confusion fades. Each reaction you release uncovers a little more of this clarity. Each moment of awareness brings you closer to yourself. This journey is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens in small moments of choosing not to react, choosing to breathe, choosing to observe. As this understanding deepens, life feels simpler, not because responsibilities disappear, but because inner conflict dissolves. You no longer argue with reality. You no longer replay every interaction. You no longer live trapped in anticipation or regret. You live here fully, calmly, honestly. This is the gift of non-reaction, not emotional numbness, not detachment from life, but intimacy with life without suffering. When reactions fade, your true self is revealed, and this self is naturally peaceful, naturally aware, and naturally content. This is why Buddhism teaches that the less you react, the happier you become. Because happiness is not something you add to your life. It is what remains when unnecessary reactions fall away. And when you finally meet your true self, you realize that peace was never missing. It was simply hidden beneath the noise. 9. A mind that does not react cannot be controlled. Buddhism teaches that the greatest power a human being can develop is not the power to dominate others, but the power to remain unshaken within themselves. A reactive mind is an exposed mind. It can be manipulated, provoked, pressured, and disturbed easily. A non-reactive mind, however, becomes untouchable. When you stop reacting automatically, you step out of invisible chains that most people never realize they are wearing. Most control in the world works through emotional reaction. Fear controls through threat. Anger controls through provocation. Desire controls through temptation. Guilt controls through pressure. When your emotions are easily triggered, you become predictable. People know how to push your buttons. Situations know how to shake you. Even your own thoughts know how to disturb you. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins when you no longer respond automatically to these triggers. The Buddha observed that suffering continues, not because the world is cruel, but because the mind reacts blindly. When someone insults you and you react with anger, they control your emotional state. When uncertainty arises and you react with fear, the future controls your peace. When desire appears and you react impulsively, craving controls your behavior. A reactive mind is always being pulled outward. It is never truly at rest. Non-reaction does not mean passivity for weakness. Buddhism makes this very clear. Non-reaction means conscious response instead of unconscious impulse. It means you allow awareness to lead instead of emotion. When you stop reacting immediately, you reclaim the space to choose, and choice is the foundation of freedom. Without choice, you are merely responding to conditioning. The Buddha taught that conditioning shapes most human behavior. Past experiences, habits, fears, and expectations all live inside the mind, waiting to be triggered. When a trigger appears, the conditioned reaction follows automatically. This is why people repeat the same emotional patterns for years. They react the same way, suffer the same way, and wonder why nothing changes. Awareness breaks this cycle. When you see the reaction arise but do not follow it, the conditioning begins to weaken. Over time, this practice changes the structure of the mind. Triggers lose their power. Situations that once caused anxiety no longer feel threatening. Words that once caused anger no longer disturb your center. This does not happen because you became numb. It happens because the mind learned stability. The Buddha taught that a stable mind is like a mountain. Storms may pass around it, but the mountain remains unmoved. A non-reactive mind also cannot be manipulated easily by society. Many people are controlled by comparison, validation, and external approval. They react emotionally to success, failure, praise, and criticism. Buddhism teaches that these reactions create endless dissatisfaction. When you stop reacting to comparison, you stop chasing status. When you stop reacting to validation, you stop needing approval. When you stop reacting to pressure, you stop living according to others' expectations. This freedom brings a deep sense of dignity. You no longer rush to prove yourself. You no longer explain yourself unnecessarily. You no longer feel threatened by disagreement. You listen calmly, you act deliberately, you speak when necessary, and remain silent when silence is wiser. This calm presence is often misunderstood by others, but it does not matter. Your peace no longer depends on being understood. The Buddha also taught that a non-reactive mind brings clarity. When emotions are not clouding perception, you see situations as they truly are. You recognize manipulation early. You sense when something is unhealthy. You make decisions based on understanding rather than impulse. Many people make life-changing mistakes, not because they lack intelligence, but because they reacted emotionally in critical moments. Non-reaction protects you from these errors. As this clarity deepens, fear begins to dissolve. Fear survives on anticipation and imagination. It feeds on reactions to thoughts about the future. When you stop reacting to fearful thoughts, they lose strength. You begin to trust your ability to remain centered no matter what happens. This trust is powerful. It frees you from constant worry and overthinking. You stop living in preparation for disaster and start living in present. The Buddha taught that true security does not come from controlling circumstances. It comes from knowing that you can meet any circumstance with awareness. A mind trained in non-reaction is resilient. Loss does not destroy it. Change does not overwhelm it. Uncertainty does not paralyze it. This resilience is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet and steady. It comes from inner mastery. Non-reaction also transforms relationships. When you stop reacting defensively, conflicts lose intensity. When you stop reacting emotionally, conversations become clearer. When you stop reacting from ego, connection becomes deeper. You no longer need to win arguments. You no longer need to dominate discussions. You seek understanding rather than victory. This shifts the entire dynamic of how people interact with you. Buddhism teaches that compassion naturally arises from non-reaction. When you are not caught in your own emotional storms, you can see others more clearly. You recognize their reactions as expressions of their conditioning and pain. This understanding does not excuse harmful behavior, but it frees you from hatred and resentment. You respond with boundaries instead of anger. You protect yourself without losing peace. The Buddha described enlightenment as freedom from reactivity, not a mystical escape from life, but a deep understanding of how the mind creates suffering. Each time you choose awareness over reaction, you move closer to this freedom. Each moment of restraint weakens old patterns. Each pause strengthens wisdom. Over time, the mind becomes spacious and calm. This is why a non-reactive mind cannot be controlled. It is no longer driven by fear, desire, or ego. It is guided by awareness, and awareness cannot be manipulated. It sees clearly, it remains steady, it chooses wisely. In this state, happiness is no longer fragile. It is grounded in inner stability rather than external conditions. The Buddha taught that mastery of the mind is the highest victory, not victory over others, but victory over unconscious reaction. When you achieve this mastery, you move through life with quiet confidence. You are present without tension, alert without anxiety, engaged without attachment. This is true power. This is true freedom. This is why Buddhism teaches that the less you react, the happier and freer you become. Because when reactions end, control ends. And when control ends, peace begins. 10. Freedom is living without inner resistance. Buddhism teaches that the deepest form of suffering does not come from pain, loss, or difficulty. It comes from resistance. Resistance is the inner fight against what already is. It is the silent argument the mind creates when reality does not match expectation. It is the tension that appears when life unfolds in a way the ego does not approve of. This resistance is subtle, but it shapes almost all human suffering, and true freedom begins the moment this resistance ends. Most people believe they are suffering because life is unfair, because people disappoint them, or because circumstances are difficult. The Buddha taught something far more precise. He taught that suffering continues because the mind refuses to accept what is happening. It says this should not be happening, or this should be different. The moment this inner resistance appears, peace disappears. The situation itself may be neutral, but resistance turns it into suffering. Resistance expresses itself through reaction. Anger is resistance to disrespect. Fear is resistance to uncertainty. Anxiety is resistance to not knowing. Sadness often hides resistance to loss. Even frustration is resistance to delay. Buddhism teaches that whenever the mind reacts strongly, resistance is present, and wherever resistance exists, suffering follows. The Buddha observed that reality does not respond to resistance. Life does not change because the mind argues with it. Pain does not disappear because the mind complains. Loss does not reverse because the mind refuses it. Resistance only creates exhaustion. It drains emotional energy and clouds perception. This is why people feel tired, even when nothing physical is happening. They are constantly fighting reality inside their own minds. Freedom, according to Buddhism, is not escaping life. It is ending this inner war. Freedom is meeting each moment without resistance. This does not mean you approve of everything that happens. It means you stop adding mental conflict to unavoidable experiences. You accept the moment fully, even if you do not like it. Acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is clarity. When resistance drops, something profound happens. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, the mind slows down. Emotional reactions soften naturally. You are no longer burning energy fighting what is already here. Instead, you use that energy to respond wisely. The Buddha taught that acceptance clears the mind so action can arise from understanding rather than emotion. Many people fear acceptance because they believe it means giving up. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Acceptance allows effective action. When the mind is calm and clear, it sees solutions more easily. When the mind is not trapped in emotional reaction, it chooses better responses. Resistance blinds. Acceptance reveals. Living without inner resistance also changes your relationship with pain. Pain still arises. Loss still occurs. Difficulty still appears. But suffering no longer multiplies. Pain becomes a physical or emotional experience, not an identity. You feel it fully, but you do not add stories to it. You do not ask endless why questions. You do not punish yourself mentally. You allow pain to move through you naturally, and because you are not resisting it, it does not stay longer than necessary. The Buddha taught that this non-resistant state is where wisdom lives. Wisdom is not intellectual knowledge. It is the ability to see reality clearly without distortion. Resistance distorts perception. It makes small problems feel large. It makes temporary discomfort feel permanent. When resistance ends, perception becomes accurate. You see things as they are, not as the mind fears them to be. Living without resistance also dissolves fear. Fear depends on fighting the unknown. When you accept uncertainty, fear loses its foundation. You no longer need guarantees to feel safe. You trust your ability to remain present. You trust your awareness. This trust creates inner security that does not depend on circumstances. The Buddha taught that this inner security is the foundation of true happiness. Happiness is not excitement or constant pleasure. It is ease. It is the feeling of being at home within yourself. Resistance creates tension. Acceptance creates ease. And ease is happiness. As resistance fades, life feels simpler. You stop overthinking conversations. You stop replaying events. You stop worrying excessively about outcomes. You stop preparing for emotional disasters that may never come. You live here, now, fully. Presence becomes natural, because nothing inside you is fighting the moment. Living without inner resistance also deepens compassion. When you are no longer fighting your own experience, you become more understanding of others. You recognize that most people are reacting because they are resisting their own pain. This understanding softens judgment. Compassion replaces resentment. You set boundaries without anger. You protect yourself without hatred. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not something mystical or distant. It is the end of resistance. It is the moment when the mind stops arguing with reality. When there is no resistance, there is no suffering. When there is no suffering, peace is revealed. This peace is not created. It was always there, hidden beneath layers of reaction and resistance. This is why the Buddha emphasized awareness so deeply. Awareness allows you to notice resistance the moment it appears. You feel the tightening in the body. You notice the urge to react. You sense the emotional push. And instead of following it, you remain present. You breathe. And in that observation, resistance dissolves. Living without inner resistance does not make you passive or indifferent. It makes you powerful in the quietest way. You are no longer driven by emotion. You are guided by clarity. You respond rather than react. You act rather than impulsively respond. This is mastery of the mind. The Buddha taught that the highest victory is not conquering the world, but conquering the mind's tendency to resist reality. When you achieve this, life no longer feels like a battle. It feels like a flow. Challenges still arise, but they do not disturb your center. Joy still appears, but you do not cling to it. Everything moves, and you remain steady. This is the final teaching of non-reaction. The less you react, the less you resist. The less you resist, the freer you become. And when freedom becomes your natural state, happiness is no longer something you chase. It is something you live. This is the Buddha's quiet promise. Not a life without pain, but a life without inner conflict. Not a world that always cooperates, but a mind that no longer fights it. And in that peace, you discover that you were never missing happiness. You were only resisting it. 11. Peace comes when you stop needing life to be different. Buddhism teaches that the final root of suffering is not pain, not loss, and not difficulty, but the belief that life must be different for you to be at peace. As long as the mind is waiting for conditions to change, peace remains postponed. The Buddha taught that many people spend their entire lives saying, "I will be happy when this improves," or "I will be calm when this problem ends," without realizing that this mindset quietly steals the present moment from them again and again. Most people do not realize how much energy they spend mentally negotiating with life. They argue with the past, wishing it had gone differently. They argue with the present, wishing it would hurry up or slow down. They argue with the future, wishing it would become safer, easier, or more predictable. Buddhism teaches that this constant mental negotiation is resistance in disguise. It is the mind refusing to allow life to be as it is, and wherever this refusal exists, peace cannot enter. The Buddha observed that life does not need permission to unfold. Change happens whether you approve of it or not. People behave according to their own conditioning. Circumstances shift without warning. Loss arrives uninvited. Aging continues without pause. When the mind keeps demanding that reality adjust to its preferences, it creates endless frustration. Peace does not disappear because life is imperfect. Peace disappears because the mind insists that life should be perfect. When you stop needing life to be different, something profound occurs. The mind relaxes its grip. The constant tension of expectation dissolves. You stop measuring each moment against an imagined ideal. You meet the moment directly, without comparison. Buddhism teaches that this direct meeting is presence, and presence is where peace lives. This does not mean you stop improving your life or stop taking action. Buddhism does not teach passivity, it teaches clarity. When you no longer argue with reality, you see it clearly, and when you see clearly, your actions become wiser. You stop acting from desperation. You stop chasing outcomes to escape discomfort. You act because action is appropriate, not because you are trying to fix your inner state. Many people believe peace comes from fixing external problems. The Buddha taught that peace comes from ending the internal demand that life must follow your plan. When you stop demanding guarantees, certainty, and fairness, you become lighter. You stop fighting invisible battles. You stop carrying emotional tension everywhere you go. This shift changes how you experience difficulty. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks. Delays no longer feel like personal attacks. Delays no longer feel like punishments. Disappointments no longer feel like failures. They become part of the natural flow of existence. You still feel pain, but you no longer add bitterness to it. You still experience loss, but you no longer turn it into identity. This is emotional maturity. This is wisdom. The Buddha taught that most anxiety comes from the belief that something must not go wrong. When you release this belief, anxiety loses its foundation. You stop bracing yourself against the future. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You trust your ability to remain present no matter what unfolds. This trust brings deep inner stability. When you stop needing life to be different, gratitude arises naturally. Not forced gratitude, but a quiet appreciation for what is already here. You notice small moments. You feel the simplicity of breathing. You recognize peace in ordinary experiences. Happiness no longer feels dramatic or intense. It feels gentle and steady. This teaching also transforms relationships. When you stop needing people to be different for you to feel okay, resentment fades. You stop trying to change others to protect your emotions. You accept people as they are, while still maintaining healthy boundaries. You no longer depend on others' behavior to regulate your inner state. This creates emotional independence and healthier connections. The Buddha taught that clinging to expectations is one of the most subtle forms of attachment. Expectations seem harmless, but they quietly dictate how you feel about every moment. When expectations are met, you feel temporary pleasure. When they are not, you feel frustration. peace becomes conditional. When you release expectations, peace becomes unconditional. Stopping the need for life to be different does not mean you lose ambition or purpose. It means your sense of well-being is no longer hostage to outcomes. You pursue goals without tension. You work without desperation. You rest without guilt. You live with balance. As this understanding deepens, the mind becomes spacious. You stop rushing. You stop forcing timelines. You stop comparing your journey to others. You realize that life unfolds in its own rhythm. Fighting that rhythm only creates exhaustion. Flowing with it creates ease. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not reaching a perfect state. It is ending the habit of resisting imperfect reality. When resistance ends, peace reveals itself. This peace is not excitement. It is contentment. It is the feeling that nothing is missing in this moment, even if life is not ideal. When you stop needing life to be different, you stop postponing happiness. You stop waiting for permission to be at peace. You realize that peace has always been available, but you were looking for it in conditions instead of awareness. This is the quiet wisdom Buddhism offers. Not a promise of a perfect life, but a promise of a peaceful mind. Not a world without challenges, but a heart that no longer fights them. When you let life be as it is, you finally let yourself be free. This is the maturity of non-reaction. This is the completion of emotional control. This is where happiness stops being a goal and becomes a natural state of being. 12. When the mind stops reacting, life becomes simple. Buddhism teaches that the ultimate freedom is not found in controlling life, escaping problems, or achieving a perfect state. Ultimate freedom is simplicity of mind. A simple mind is not a naive mind. It is a mind that is no longer tangled in unnecessary reaction. When reactions fall away, life naturally becomes simpler. Not because responsibilities disappear, but because inner confusion dissolves. Most people live in constant mental complexity. They analyze everything. They replay conversations. They imagine future problems. They interpret others' behavior endlessly. Because of this, even simple situations feel heavy. A single word can disturb the entire day. A small delay can create hours of stress. Buddhism teaches that this complexity is not caused by life itself. It is caused by the mind's habit of reacting to everything. The Buddha observed that life, at its core, is very simple. There is seeing, hearing, feeling, thinking and breathing. Everything else is mental commentary. When the mind reacts, it adds layers of meaning, judgment, fear, and expectation. These layers pile up and create suffering. When reactions stop, these layers fall away. What remains is direct experience. And direct experience is always manageable. When the mind stops reacting, problems no longer feel personal. A difficulty is seen as a situation, not as an attack. A mistake is seen as an event, not as an identity. A failure is seen as feedback, not as proof of worthlessness. This shift changes everything. You stop carrying emotional weight that does not belong to the moment. You deal with what is actually happening, not what the mind imagines. Buddhism teaches that simplicity arises from clarity. When reactions fade, clarity appears. You see what matters and what does not. You stop giving attention to trivial disturbances. You stop engaging in unnecessary conflict. You stop complicating decisions with fear-based thinking. Life becomes quieter internally, even if the external world remains busy. This simplicity also changes how you relate to time. The past loses its grip because you no longer react emotionally to memory. The future loses its threat because you no longer react to imagination. You live more fully in the present, not because you force yourself to, but because reactions are no longer pulling you away from it. The present moment becomes enough. The Buddha taught that much of human exhaustion comes from mental resistance, not physical effort. When you stop reacting, you stop resisting. When resistance ends, energy returns. You feel less tired, even when life is demanding. You recover faster from stress. You sleep more peacefully. This is not because life became easier, but because the mind stopped fighting it. When reactions stop, emotions still arise, but they no longer dominate. Anger comes and goes without leaving scars. Sadness passes without turning into despair. Fear appears without controlling decisions. You feel fully, but you are not overwhelmed. This emotional balance brings a deep sense of stability. You trust yourself. You trust your mind. You trust that nothing inside you needs to be feared. Simplicity also brings honesty. When you are no longer reacting, you stop pretending. You stop performing for approval. You stop shaping yourself to fit expectations. You act from truth rather than fear. This authenticity feels light. You no longer need to explain yourself constantly. Silence becomes comfortable. Presence becomes natural. The Buddha taught that wisdom reveals itself in ordinary moments. Washing dishes, walking, breathing, listening. When the mind is not reacting, even simple activities feel meaningful. There is a quiet joy in being present. Not excitement, but contentment. This is the happiness that does not fade quickly. It is not dependent on success or recognition. It arises from inner harmony. When life becomes simple, compassion deepens. You understand that others suffer not because they are bad, but because they are reactive. You see their anger as pain. You see their fear as confusion. This understanding softens the heart. You respond with kindness when possible and boundaries when necessary, without hatred. This balance brings peace in relationships. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not a dramatic experience. It is the natural state of a mind that has stopped reacting, a mind that sees clearly, a mind that does not cling, a mind that does not resist. This state is not distant or rare. It is available in every moment you choose awareness over impulse. As reactions continue to dissolve, life feels spacious. You are no longer rushed internally. You are no longer constantly preparing for emotional impact. You move through life with steadiness. You respond when action is needed. You remain still when silence is wiser. This balance is the fruit of long practice. The Buddha taught that the end of suffering is not the end of pain, but the end of unnecessary reaction. When reactions stop, suffering stops multiplying. Life becomes honest, direct, and simple. You live with what is, not with imagined versions of what should be. This simplicity does not remove responsibility. It removes confusion. You still work, you still care, you still engage, but you do so without inner conflict, without resistance, without constant emotional turbulence. This is freedom in its most grounded form. When the mind stops reacting, happiness is no longer something you chase. It is something you notice. It is already present in the absence of inner struggle. Peace is no longer fragile. It becomes your natural background. This is the final teaching of non-reaction. Not a philosophy to memorize, but a way of living. Each moment you pause instead of reacting, you simplify your life. Each breath of awareness brings you back to yourself. And slowly, gently, without force, life becomes peaceful. Not because it changed, but because you did. 13. Nothing outside you has the power to disturb you anymore. Buddhism teaches that the final stage of inner freedom is reached when you deeply understand one truth. Not intellectually, but through lived experience. Nothing outside you has the power to disturb your peace unless you allow it. This realization is not arrogance, detachment, or emotional coldness. It is maturity of the mind. It is the point where awareness becomes so steady that reactions no longer arise automatically. Life continues to move, but it no longer moves you. Most people believe they are affected by the world. They say, "This situation ruined my peace," or "That person made me angry," or "This problem destroyed my happiness." The Buddha taught that this belief is the final illusion. Situations do not disturb you. People do not disturb you. Events do not disturb you. What disturbs you is the movement inside your own mind, reacting to what happens. When this movement ends, disturbance. At first, this teaching feels difficult to accept, because the mind has spent its entire life assigning responsibility for its emotions to the outside world. But Buddhism teaches radical responsibility, not blame. Responsibility. Responsibility for awareness. Responsibility for reaction. Responsibility for inner state. When you take this responsibility fully, you reclaim your power. The Buddha taught that everything you experience arrives through the senses. Sound enters the ear. Images enter the eye. Sensations arise in the body. Thoughts appear in the mind. None of these experiences contain suffering by themselves. Suffering is added by reaction. The moment the mind stops adding commentary, judgment, and resistance, experience becomes neutral. It simply is. This realization changes how you experience conflict. When someone speaks harshly, you hear the sound. You recognize the meaning. But you do not personalize it. You do not replay it. You do not turn it into an identity story. The words pass through awareness without leaving residue. This does not mean you allow harm. It means you respond wisely, without inner disturbance. You set boundaries calmly. You walk away without bitterness. You protect yourself without hatred. The Buddha taught that the mind becomes invincible not by hardening, but by softening. A soft mind does not mean a weak mind. It means a flexible mind. A flexible mind bends without breaking. When criticism comes, it bends and returns to stillness. When loss comes, it bends and returns to presence. When uncertainty comes, it bends and returns to awareness. This flexibility prevents fracture. This is strength. As this understanding deepens, fear dissolves almost completely. Fear survives on imagined future disturbance. When you know that nothing outside you can shake your center, fear has nowhere to root itself. You may still feel caution. You may still plan wisely, but anxiety no longer controls you. You trust your ability to remain present regardless of what happens. This trust is profound freedom. The Buddha taught that a mind no longer ruled by reaction is beyond manipulation. Praise cannot inflate it. Blame cannot crush it. Gain cannot intoxicate it. Loss cannot devastate it. Pleasure does not enslave it. Pain does not define it. This does not mean the mind becomes indifferent. It means it becomes balanced. Balance is the hallmark of wisdom. When this balance stabilizes, you begin to live from a place of deep inner authority, not authority over others, but authority over your own mind. You no longer rush to explain yourself. You no longer chase validation. You no longer react to provocation. Your presence alone carries calm. People may feel unsettled by this because they are used to emotional exchange, but you no longer need to participate in emotional chaos. Buddhism teaches that this state is not achieved through force. It arises naturally through continuous awareness and non-reaction. Each moment you choose presence over impulse strengthens this stability. Each time you observe instead of react, the mind becomes clearer. Over time, reactions no longer appear because the conditions that created them no longer exist. This is the stage where peace becomes unshakable. Not because life stopped testing you, but because the mind stopped getting tight with disturbance. You no longer feel like life is happening to you. You feel like life is happening within awareness. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. The Buddha taught that this realization is liberation. Liberation from emotional slavery. Liberation from unconscious patterns. Liberation from the belief that happiness depends on circumstances. When you live from this understanding, happiness becomes stable. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep and constant. This does not remove compassion. In fact, compassion deepens. When you are no longer disturbed by others, you can see their suffering clearly. You recognize their anger as pain, their cruelty as confusion, their reactivity as unconsciousness. This understanding creates kindness without weakness. You help when possible. You step away when necessary. You do not carry resentment. As nothing outside you has the power to disturb you, you finally rest. Not physical rest, but existential rest. The mind stops scanning for threats. The heart stops bracing for disappointment. The nervous system relaxes. You feel safe within yourself. This safety is not dependent on guarantees. It comes from inner stability. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not becoming something new. It is ceasing to be disturbed by what is. When disturbance ends, clarity remains. When clarity remains, peace becomes permanent. This peace is not excitement. It is contentment. It is the quiet joy of being fully present without inner conflict. At this stage, life feels intimate and simple. You experience joy in small things. You feel gratitude without effort. You live without constant emotional friction. You respond when needed. You remain silent when appropriate. You move through life lightly. This is the final fruit of non-reaction. The mind no longer belongs to the world. The world belongs to awareness. Nothing outside you has the power to disturb you anymore, because you have discovered where power truly lives. It lives in awareness. It lives in presence. It lives in non-reaction. And once this is known, not as an idea but as lived truth, suffering ends not by force but by understanding. 14. You no longer seek peace because you have become it. Buddhism teaches that the final transformation does not happen when you finally find peace, but when you realize that peace was never something to be found. Peace was always your natural state, temporarily covered by reaction, resistance, and misunderstanding. When these layers fall away, there is nothing new to add. You do not gain peace. You return to it. This is the moment where seeking ends, because what you were seeking has become who you are. Most people spend their lives chasing peace, as if it were a destination. They believe peace will come when problems are solved, when relationships improve, when success is achieved, or when life becomes stable. The Buddha taught that this way of living keeps peace always just out of reach. As long as peace depends on conditions, it remains fragile. It comes briefly and disappears quickly. True peace appears only when it is no longer dependent on anything. When the mind stops reacting, resisting, clinging, and demanding, it naturally settles into stillness. This stillness is not boredom. It is alert, alive, and deeply present. In this state, you are no longer trying to escape discomfort or chase pleasure. You are fully here, fully awake, and fully at ease. Buddhism teaches that this is the state of being rather than becoming. At this stage, your relationship with effort changes completely. Earlier on the path, effort was necessary to pause, to observe, to not react. Now effort becomes subtle. Awareness is natural. Presence is effortless. You do not need to remind yourself to stay calm. Calmness is your default. You do not need to protect your peace aggressively. There is nothing attacking it anymore. Peace is no longer something fragile that can be stolen. It is stable because it is no longer built on resistance. The Buddha taught that when peace becomes your nature, life continues as before, but it is experienced differently. Challenges still arise. Loss still occurs. Uncertainty still appears. But these experiences no longer disturb your center. They pass through awareness without creating inner conflict. You respond appropriately, but you do not suffer unnecessarily. The mind remains spacious even when life is demanding. This stage is often misunderstood by others. People may think you are detached, indifferent, or distant. In reality, you are deeply engaged, but without emotional entanglement. You listen fully without absorbing chaos. You care deeply without attachment. You act decisively without aggression. Buddhism teaches that this balance is the mark of wisdom. When you have become peace, you stop explaining yourself. Not because you are arrogant, but because you no longer feel the need to justify your inner state. You do not argue for calmness. You embody it. Your presence alone communicates stability. People may feel safe around you without knowing why. This is not something you try to do. It happens naturally when the mind is settled. The Buddha taught that such a person lives without inner noise. Thoughts still arise, but they do not dominate. Emotions still appear, but they do not linger. The mind feels clean, uncluttered, and clear. This clarity allows you to see life honestly. You see beauty without attachment. You see pain without aversion. You accept impermanence without fear. At this level, compassion becomes effortless. You no longer try to be compassionate. You simply understand. You see how much people suffer because they are reactive, fearful, and lost in thought. This understanding softens the heart. You do not judge harshly. You do not condemn easily. You know that everyone is acting from their level of awareness. This knowledge creates patience and kindness without weakness. Buddhism teaches that becoming peace also transforms how you use time. You are no longer in a hurry internally. Even when you move quickly, the mind remains calm. You are not rushing to reach a future moment where things will finally be okay. Things are okay now, even when they are imperfect. This removes a deep layer of anxiety that most people carry unconsciously. You also stop measuring your life against others. Comparison loses meaning because your happiness is no longer derived from external achievement. Success and failure are seen as movements within life, not reflections of your worth. This releases a tremendous amount of pressure. You live according to truth rather than expectation. The Buddha taught that when peace becomes your nature, desire changes. You still have preferences, but they do not control you. You enjoy what comes, and you let go when it leaves. You pursue goals without desperation. You rest without guilt. You live without inner conflict. This harmony between action and acceptance is rare, but it is the fruit of long awareness. At this stage, silence becomes sacred. Not empty silence, but living silence. Even when you speak, silence is present beneath your words. Even when you act, stillness guides your movement. This silence is not withdrawal, it is depth. It allows life to be experienced fully, without distortion. The Buddha taught that this is liberation in daily life, not retreating into a cave, not escaping society, but moving through the world untouched by its chaos, engaged without entanglement, present without pressure. This is the highest expression of non-reaction. When you have become peace, happiness is no longer something you think about. It is felt quietly, like a steady warmth beneath everything. It does not fluctuate dramatically. It does not depend on praise or success. It exists because the mind is no longer divided against itself. This is the completion of the path. Not a dramatic ending, but a quiet one. The mind rests. The heart opens. life continues, and you live it without inner struggle. This is why Buddhism teaches that the less you react, the happier you become, because when reaction ends completely, seeking ends. And when seeking ends, peace is no longer an idea. It is who you are. 15. Life flows through you when you no longer stand in its way. Buddhism teaches that the deepest suffering is not caused by life itself, but by the way the mind stands in front of life, resisting, controlling, and interfering with its natural movement. When the mind constantly tries to manage every outcome, protect every feeling, and predict every possibility, life begins to feel heavy. The Buddha taught that true peace arrives when you stop standing in the way of life and allow it to move through you naturally. Most people believe they must constantly hold themselves together. They believe they must manage emotions, control situations, and maintain an image in order to survive. This creates continuous tension. The mind becomes tight, defensive, and exhausted. Buddhism teaches that this tension is unnecessary. Life does not require your constant resistance to function. It requires your presence. When you stop reacting, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop interrupting the natural flow of experience. Thoughts arise and pass without being chased. Emotions appear and dissolve without being suppressed or exaggerated. Situations unfold without being mentally argued with. This does not mean life becomes predictable. It means the mind becomes flexible enough to move with change instead of against it. The Buddha observed that resistance creates friction, and friction creates suffering. When you resist sadness, it deepens. When you resist fear, it grows stronger. When you resist uncertainty, anxiety multiplies. But when you allow experience to move through awareness without interference, it completes itself naturally. Just like a wave that rises and falls, emotions pass when they are not blocked. Allowing life to flow does not mean you become passive or careless. Buddhism does not teach indifference. It teaches alignment. When you are aligned with reality, your actions become timely and appropriate. You speak when words are needed. You act when action is required. You rest when rest is wise. There is no internal argument about what should be happening. You respond from clarity rather than from panic. This alignment brings a deep sense of trust. You trust life because you trust your ability to meet it. You no longer need guarantees to feel safe. You know that whatever arises, awareness will be present. This trust dissolves a deep layer of fear that most people carry without realizing it. You stop preparing mentally for disaster. You stop rehearsing emotional pain. You meet life as it arrives. The Buddha taught that most exhaustion comes from mental interference. People feel tired, not because life demands too much, but because they are constantly resisting what is happening. When resistance ends, energy returns. The body relaxes, the nervous system calms, the mind becomes clear. You feel alive again, not because circumstances improved, but because inner conflict dissolved. As life flows through you, identity loosens. You stop defining yourself by roles, achievements, or emotional states. You are no longer trying to protect a fixed sense of self. You allow yourself to change with life. This fluidity brings freedom. You are no longer trapped by who you think you should be. You become responsive rather than rigid. Buddhism teaches that this fluid way of living brings great wisdom. When you are not clinging to opinions, you listen more deeply. When you are not defending identity, you learn more easily. When you are not reacting emotionally, you see situations clearly. Wisdom arises not from effort, but from openness. When you stop standing in the way of life, suffering loses its grip. Pain may still appear, but it no longer turns into prolonged struggle. Difficulty arises, but it does not define your inner state. Loss occurs, but it does not destroy your center. Everything moves, and you move with it. The Buddha taught that this state is liberation in daily life, not escaping responsibilities, but carrying them lightly, not avoiding challenges, but meeting them without fear, not withdrawing from the world, but being in the world without being owned by it. In this state, happiness becomes quiet and steady. It is no longer dependent on excitement or success. It arises from harmony with life. You feel content without needing constant stimulation. You feel fulfilled without needing external validation. This happiness is durable because it is rooted in acceptance, not in control. As life flows through you, compassion deepens naturally. You recognize that others suffer because they resist life just as you once did. Their anger, fear, and confusion no longer trigger you. You respond with understanding instead of judgment. You help when possible. You step back when necessary. You remain kind without sacrificing clarity. The Buddha taught that awakening is not becoming something extraordinary. It is becoming natural. It is returning to a state where life is allowed to be as it is, and you are allowed to be as you are. No constant fixing, no constant improvement, just presence. When you no longer stand in the way of life, each moment feels complete. You are not rushing to the next moment to escape the current one. You are not clinging to the past to avoid the present. You live here fully. This fullness is peace. This is the quiet end of the path, not an ending where life stops, but an ending where struggle stops. Life continues to flow, and you flow with it. There is no inner resistance. There is no unnecessary reaction. There is only awareness moving naturally with experience. This is why Buddhism teaches that the less you react, the happier you become. Because when reaction ends completely, life no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening through you, and in that flow you finally rest. Buddhism teaches that happiness is not something you achieve by fixing the world, controlling people, or forcing life to behave in a certain way. Happiness appears when the inner struggle ends. Throughout this journey, you have seen a simple but life-changing truth unfold again and again. Suffering grows through reaction, and peace grows through awareness. The less you react, the less power the outside world has over your inner state. And when the outside world loses that power, happiness becomes natural. You have learned that pain is part of life, but suffering is created in the mind. You have seen how unconscious reactions keep old wounds alive, how ego demands defense, how expectations create tension, and how resistance turns ordinary moments into emotional battles. None of these patterns were happening because you were weak. They were happening because the mind was untrained. And the Buddha taught that the mind can always be trained. As reaction slowly fades, something beautiful replaces it. Space appears. Silence appears. Clarity appears. You begin to feel lighter, not because life has become easy, but because you are no longer carrying unnecessary emotional weight. You stop arguing with reality. You stop replaying the past. You stop fearing the future. You start living where life actually happens, here and now. This is not a path of becoming emotionless or distant. It is a path of becoming deeply present without being disturbed. You still feel, you still care, you still engage, but you do so without losing yourself. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of explode. You observe instead of drown. This is emotional mastery, not suppression. Buddhism never promised a perfect life. It promised a peaceful mind. And a peaceful mind changes everything. With peace, challenges feel manageable. With peace, relationships soften. With peace, decisions become clearer. With peace, happiness stops being something you chase and starts being something you notice. As you continue this practice in daily life, remember that progress is quiet. Every pause before reacting is a victory. Every moment of awareness weakens old patterns. Every time you let an emotion pass without feeding it, you are freeing yourself. There is no finish line to rush toward. This path unfolds naturally, gently, and honestly. The Buddha taught that when the mind stops fighting what is, life becomes simple. When life becomes simple, the heart becomes light. And when the heart becomes light, happiness is no longer fragile. It becomes steady, calm, and deeply rooted. So remember this truth and return to it often. You do not need to control life to be at peace. You do not need to change others to be happy. You do not need to react to protect yourself. Peace begins the moment you choose awareness over impulse. Happiness grows the moment you stop feeding reaction. The less you react, the happier you become.